One of the crazier stories in college football that no one is really talking about is the insane rise of Georgia Tech football. Just a few years ago, the Yellow Jackets were a completely dead program with a really bad coach, and pretty much no one went to the game. While it's by no means perfect down in Atlanta right now, Georgia Tech football is competitive, they have a really good coach, they play hard, fans are returning to the stands, and the Jackets have a ton of potential going into the future. This is all because of their new head coach Brent Key, who was never really supposed to be here. He was given the interim tag in the 2022 season, and most of the time, programs do not keep interim coaches. Despite that, he beat the odds, became the Georgia Tech head coach, and has seen a ton of success in year 2. I think year 3 could be even better for the Jackets, but for now, I want to talk about how Georgia Tech got to this point. We're going to talk about how bad things got, how Brent Key came in and turned things around, and why I'm super pumped for their future. But before we get started, if you love college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the impossible rise of Georgia Tech football. Everyone knows that historically, Georgia Tech is a really solid program, and while they've never been a blue blood by any means, they've had their fair share of big-time seasons and big-time players. Most notably, they had Calvin Johnson as a receiver there. I'm not going to spend too much time on the team's history, but from the beginning of the century to the mid-2010s, the Jackets were one of the most consistent teams in all of college football. They were a threat to win 7 to 9 games pretty much every year, and then maybe pull off an upset. Famously, they knocked off an undefeated Florida State team by way of that blocked field goal, and under Paul Johnson, the Jackets had a couple of big-time seasons. In 2009, they ended up going 11-3 and finished as high as number 13 in the country. They also won 9 games in 2008 and saw their peak in 2014. The Jackets climbed as high as number 7 in the country and then eventually won the Orange Bowl. During that era, we saw the rise of one of the best triple option quarterbacks ever in Justin Thomas, and Tech was a really solid team. From 1997 to 2014, they made a bowl game each and every season, and the Jackets were by no means a pushover, but then they started to fall on hard time. They went 3-9 and missed a bowl game for the first time in 2015, and then also went 5-6 in 2017. Sandwiched between that was a 9-win season, but in 2018, Paul Johnson announced that he was done, and they went out with a loss in the Quick Lane Bowl. At the time, Paul Johnson was the 4th winningest coach in the FBS, as he had 189 career wins. He said, quote, "After 40 years of coaching, it's time to take a break. My family has sacrificed a lot over the years, and I want to watch my daughter perform as a professional opera singer and do some things with my wife that I never had the chance to do." Johnson was a great coach. He became one of the top 4 winningest coaches in Jackets history, led into the ACC Championship in 2009, and had multiple 9+ win seasons. It was both a sad and opportunistic moment for Georgia Tech. Yes, they'd be losing a legendary coach and consistent winning, but that style of football really wasn't working either. The Jackets ran the triple option, so it was hard to get big-time recruits. It'd be hard to ever compete for college football playoff appearances, and it felt like Georgia Tech could not move forward. At the time, the candidates that many thought would come to Georgia Tech included Los Angeles Chargers offensive coordinator Ken Whisenhunt, Clemson co-offensive coordinator Tony Elliott, Alabama offensive line coach Brent Key, and Army coach Jeff Monken. Those were the 4 guys that many thought it would be, but it ended up being a completely different hire, and a guy who unfortunately would drag Georgia Tech football into the mud. His name was Geoff Collins. To be fair, at the time it wasn't the worst hire in the world, as Collins had been at Georgia Tech in 1999 and 2001, had spent time at Alabama, UCF, and as the co-defensive coordinator at Mississippi State. He was a Dan Mullen disciple and followed him to Florida. Collins became the defensive coordinator from 2015 to 2016 and was actually widely seen as one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. He was also a great recruiter, so it was no surprise when he took the Temple job. He became the head coach of the Owls in 2016 and followed Matt Rule. In their first year, Temple ended up going 7-6 and won their first bowl game since 2011. In year 2, the Owls started out 0-2, but ended up finishing the year at 8-4 with a 7-1 record in conference play. They ended up making the Independence Bowl, and at the time, Collins announced that he was going to be the head coach at Georgia Tech. Many were excited for his defense, his offensive philosophy, and his ability to recruit. He also had seen success at Temple, who had produced a line of good coaches that included Steve Adazio, Al Golden, and Matt Rule. Going into the 2019 season, the Jackets were picked to finish dead last in the ACC Coastal, and that is pretty much how the season would go. They'd lose their first game to Clemson, he'd get his first win against USF, and the only 2 remaining wins on the schedule would come on the road against Miami and NC State. Other than that, they were blown out in most of their contests, and they even lost in overtime to the Citadel. It was an absolutely awful season, but many were willing to give him a break because he had a solid 2020 recruiting class that included blue-chip quarterback Jeff Sims and big-time running back Jahmyr Gibbs. Unfortunately, 2020 would not really go according to plan either. They're once again finished pick near the bottom of the ACC, and besides a surprise Week 1 win against Florida State, it was an extremely disappointing season. They got blown out by UCF, Syracuse, Clemson, Boston College, and Notre Dame, and managed to get wins against bad Louisville and Duke teams before leaving the season with losses to NC State and Pitt. Once again, the Jackets really weren't competitive, but because of everything going on in the world, they were willing to overlook it once again and give them a couple more chances. But in 2021, things really started to get dicey. They lost at home to Northern Illinois in Week 1 and only finished with 3 wins the entire season. This came against Kennesaw State, on the road against Duke, and then shockingly at home against number 21 North Carolina. Most of the games were blowouts, and they ended the season with 6 straight losses, including getting shut out 100-0 in their last 2 combined games against Notre Dame and Georgia. Pretty much everyone had given up on Geoff Collins at this point, but I think because of financial reasons, he'd get a couple games in 2022. He'd only end up lasting 4 contests, as he got blown out by Clemson, shut out 42-0 by Ole Miss, and blown out on the road against UCF. Their only win came against Western Carolina, and Collins was done. On September 26th of 2022, the Jackets decided to fire him after a 9-game losing streak, him losing complete control of the program, recruiting going down the drain, and the boosters not caring anymore. He went 10-28 as Tech's coach, and now Georgia Tech was arguably one of the worst Power 5 programs in the country, and they would have to turn it over to a former alum to save the day. Brent Key was named the interim head coach, and from there, he's changed everything. Key was seen as a no-nonsense players coach, and immediately he rallied the troops and tried to save the 2022 season. Their first game would come on the road against number 24 Pittsburgh, and in this matchup, Key showed exactly what he was about. He led the Jackets to a 26-21 win, beating a ranked team in his first game. This was immediately when the fan base knew he was legit, and this would start the great turnaround. From there, they'd go ahead and beat Duke in overtime, who was a 9-win team, and they had now back-to-back wins over really good opponents. Unfortunately, though, it didn't come without growing pains, as they lost at home to Virginia and got blown out by Florida State. 2-2 was still really solid, though, and he would continue on. They went on the road and beat Virginia Tech by 1, were somewhat competitive against Miami, and then had another top 25 win. North Carolina always seems to slide off at the end of the year, and last year was no different. Georgia Tech went into Chapel Hill and beat Drake May's Tar Heels 21-17. This gave Key his second top 25 win and got them to a 4-4 mark in the conference. Unfortunately, in order to make a bowl game, he would have to go on the road and beat number 1 Georgia, which just was not going to happen. Surprisingly, it wasn't that bad, as they only lost 37-14, but the Jackets would finish year 1 at 5-7 with a 4-4 mark in the ACC. He ended up going 4-4, and despite his solid performances, there was still some question as to if they would hire him or go out and find someone else. Apparently, their new AD also was considering Willie Fritz, Jamie Chadwell, and Bill O'Brien, but eventually they made the right choice and took the interim tag off of Brent Key's name. He was an alum, he rallied the troops, and was just the kind of guy that you want to build a program around. Key not only had a solid resume in 2022, but he worked under coaches George O'Leary and Nick Saban, had plenty of experience, and was young enough to really relate to modern recruits. He said, quote, "I'm so proud and grateful to be the head coach at my alma mater, Georgia Tech. Like I've said many times over the past 2 months, I love this team and couldn't be more excited to be their head coach. We will work unbelievably hard to make our fans, alumni, and former players very proud of this program." So, would Brent Key be a 4-game wonder, or would he continue his momentum into 2023? Well, the short answer is yes, but how has this happened? 1, Key has been a great coach. 2, he's made some great hires. 3, they play as a team. And 4, he went out and found the right quarterback. Usually in these Rise videos, I talk about multiple players and their backstories, but I think we're really just going to focus on Haynes King and how he got here. Texas high school football is a huge deal, and Haynes King was the son of a coach. He ended up playing the quarterback position and eventually arrived at Longview High School. He had a great career there and ended up throwing for 2,000 yards and combined for 30 touchdowns as a senior. Because of his insane speed, accuracy, and good stats, he ended up becoming a borderline 5-star recruit and eventually decided to sign with Texas A&M. He immediately got a ton of hype and backed up Kellen Mond in 2020. He'd go into the 2021 season as the starter for Texas A&M, but unfortunately, he'd get hurt against Colorado and would be done for the year. Zach Calzada took over, and Haynes would have to watch from the sideline. In 2022, the same thing would pretty much happen. Haynes King was disappointing, Max Johnson took over, and now he'd have to find a new school. Through 3 years, Haynes had not lived up to his blue chip status, but Brent Key saw potential in him. He decided to go nab him from the portal, despite having Zach Gibson and Zach Pryon already on the roster. This would end up being a huge win, as King's had a really good season. So far, he's passed for 2,597 yards with 26 touchdowns. He's also 624 yards on the ground and 7 more scores there. He's combined for 33 touchdowns and has definitely saved his career. I may even have to do a video on how he saved it all. But how has the 2023 season gone for the Jackets? Let's take a look. While many liked the Brent Key story, there weren't many who were willing to put money down that Georgia Tech would actually be good this year. They'd end up finding out pretty quickly, as they would play Louisville on the first Friday night of college football. At the time, the Cardinals were under first-year head coach Geoff Collins, and no one really knew much about them. In this game, Georgia Tech actually looked pretty solid, but unfortunately fell 39-34. It was definitely a tough blow to them, but they were at least competitive. In week 2, they destroyed South Carolina State before having to travel to number 17 Ole Miss. In this game, unfortunately, the Rebels really put it on them, and the Jackets didn't really look all that competitive. Through 3 games, there wasn't a whole lot different from the Collins era in many people's eyes, but they would soon start to figure it out. But since then, they've been really good outside of one performance. For their 4th game of the season, they go on the road and beat Wake Forest 30-16, and that was a solid win. Luckily, they had an easy game against Bowling Green at home the following week, but unfortunately, this was a major setback. They ended up losing 38-27 to Bowling Green, and this absolutely sucked for Tech fans. It was a game they definitely wish they could have back, but then after that, they played a good game and also got lucky. On the road against number 17 Miami, Georgia Tech had fought hard, but they were pretty much certainly going to lose. All Miami had to do was take a knee, and they were going to win the game. Except, Mario Cristobal had one of the dumbest calls in college football history and decided to run it. Georgia Tech forced a fumble, and with just a few ticks remaining, Haynes King would complete a couple passes and eventually threw a late long bomb touchdown, and they upset number 17 Miami 23-20 in the finish of the year. This was a major momentum shift, as that would help save Georgia Tech's season. Still though, it hasn't been perfect. They lost at home to Boston College, got beat pretty badly on the road by Clemson, but they have made a bowl game. This past weekend, they defeated Syracuse 31-22, they went on the road and destroyed Virginia 45-17, and notably beat North Carolina again. The number 17 Tar Heels lost 46-42, and if you do the math, that is 6 wins. They've beaten 2 ranked teams, won 2 road games, and have also won 5 conference games. I bet they really wish they could have that Bowling Green matchup back, but all in all, Georgia Tech has been really competitive, they're going bowling, and Brent Key has turned things around. This upcoming weekend they're going to play against Georgia, and while this game is at home, I really don't expect it to be all that competitive. It would definitely be a welcome surprise if they could somehow upset Georgia, but I really just don't think it's going to happen. More than likely, Georgia Tech's going to finish 6-6 and go to one of the lower level bowl games. It really doesn't matter though, because this is a huge step in the right direction, and in his first year as a head coach, he led a struggling team to a bowl game. Brent Key is truly a really good coach. Emotionally, he knows how to stay in control of the game, he knows how to lead his team, and has motivated his team enough to have 4 ranked wins in just over a calendar year. He's also truly helping them transform from a triple option to a more modern style football team, and I think the sky is the limit for Brent. I think he's going to start recruiting a lot better, and Georgia Tech is going to be a competitive program. Brent Key reminds me a lot of a guy like Chris Kleiman, as they're not going to be loaded with star power, but they're going to have a good quarterback, a good defense, and they're going to play tough. That's what a school like Georgia Tech has to do to win, and I'm really excited for the future. But what do you guys think? If you're a Georgia Tech fan, what do you think about the state of the program? What do you think of Brent Key? And what topic should I do next? Before you go, don't also forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.